A lot of Arab public, they think that the relationship between Arab regimes and America is that America says jump and the Arab regimes say how high. It's no longer the case. I think that Syria right now is living in an interregnum. It's living in a period of peace between two wars, because I think that war with Israel is inevitable. This is not an Israel that's going to let you build your country safely.
The other Arab parties have said no to ethnic cleansing of Gaza, but they're not. Doesn't look like they're going to come to the party or defense in any way to the Palestinians. They wouldn't have after 15 months of genocide. So why would they do it now?
For Jordan, it would be, I would say, lethally destabilizing. It could literally lead to the fall of the regime. When you ask your ally to do something which is really terrible for them, when you ask them to slit their own throat, to destroy their own security for you, Egypt is a reservoir of manpower who can be activated in militancy against Israel.
Do you think this will be sustainable? Do you think Saudi is going to be better off in 10 years than what it was 10 years ago?
To be Palestinian means to believe in the Arab Spring. It means to believe in Arab identity. It also means to believe in Islamic identity. And it means to believe in collective liberation for everyone in the world.
And could you just maybe move
Release the volume keys. To turn on talkback, press and hold both volume keys again for 3 seconds.
Not at all.
No, it's Ramadan,
it's actually
and you're sick, and now there's the camera problem. Hi, welcome to another episode of Unapologetic. I'm your host, Ashfaq Kareem, and joining me today is Iyad el-Baghdadi. Iyad, good to see you.
Good to be with you, Ashfaq.
Iyad, I've actually been following Iyad on Twitter for probably about 13 years. I'm not very active on Twitter, but I do follow people on Twitter. And I'm very excited to speak to Iyad. He's a thinker and an activist. He rose to prominence tweeting a lot when I started following him 13 years ago during the Arab Spring. He's also co-authored The Middle East Crisis Factory. And he's the founder of the Kawakibi Foundation, which says, according to its website, that it's working towards a world free of tyranny and in which society trumps the state, extremism in all its forms has no appeal, and individual rights are sacrosanct. So, Iyad, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor to be with you.
As is your expertise, what we're going to be speaking about over the next, I guess, hour and a half to 2 hours is we're going to be speaking about Israel's war, but more specifically, we're going to be focused on its impact in the region, on regimes in the region, on Israel itself, and in the relationship with the West, and particularly the USA has with the Arab region. And Muslim societies. So first off, just to start the conversation, when I called you about a week and a half ago to set up this interview, you said that you feel that maybe Israel's days as a Jewish supremacist state, I'm not sure if you meant it as a Jewish supremacist state, that was just inferred, is probably going to last up until about 2030 or the 2030s. Just walk me through the thought process behind that and what makes you think that.
Yeah, I mean, I want to zoom out a little bit from the introduction, because I think you said some things which are very, very important to comment on. Because when we're setting the stage and we want to look at the world right now is so interconnected that it's difficult. I think what we need to do really is to take a snapshot of the moment, to take a step back and look at the world as it is today. Obviously, we want, I'm a Palestinian, and of course, Palestine has been my primary cause from my childhood, really, from before I could really remember. But I always understood that Palestine cannot be liberated in isolation. I always understood that Palestine is only one layer of my identity. I have an Arab layer to my identity and a Muslim layer to my identity. And I also, the same applies to the world at large. So today, as we discuss Israel and Israel's unsustainability or otherwise, it's going to be very difficult not to jump around and talk about other areas of the world because of this interconnection. So you asked basically about Israel's prospects as a Jewish supremacist state. Now let's be clear that Israel is a Jewish supremacist state. It has been founded as a Jewish supremacist state. Israel and Zionism Israel basically is the culmination. It's the fruit of Zionism. And it's the main project of Zionism. I do not believe that Israel can be reformed. It might have been possible in some kind of theoretical world a long time ago, but as of where we are today, I don't believe that Israel can be reformed. The Israeli state itself has been built as a supremacist state. In fact, it is now going through a transition where the elites of the country are shifting. The country's elites used to be, from its founding, used to be secular liberal, mostly Ashkenazi or European Jews. the founders of the state themselves. I mean, if you take a look at all of the founders, the majority of them, or like basically all of them, were basically of Ashkenazi origin, and again, secular liberals. Some of them were atheists. The country itself is undergoing a transition whereby, both demographically, but also when it comes to the elites, who has the power, who basically wants to say that this is my state, I own this state. This is undergoing a shift. The shift, basically, I think, is mostly complete, where the elites of the country have shifted to being religious nationalists. Why is this important when I'm talking about the supremacist premise of the state? It's because I believe that Israel in the 2030s is going to be a country in crisis, in many crises, basically systemic crises. I wouldn't. I wouldn't want to predict whether it's the early 2030s or later 2030s, but basically that decade is going to be a difficult decade for Israel. Um, and where it ties into the supremacist nature of the state, it's really that I think that the population in Israel that produces the most economic value. You see, Israel is powerful because of three or four pillars. Every country, when we want to actually analyze it, we have to look at what makes it powerful, what makes it economically powerful, militarily powerful, etc. So Israel's power is rooted really in, I would say, four or five pillars, four or five things. The first is it has a very high value economy, especially in high tech sector. This itself is built upon high quality educational institutions. So take that as, high tech industry, which basically gives it this very strong economy, which is resilient and which allows it to. We go to pillar two, which is a technologically superior IDF, a technologically superior army. So you have a base of highly skilled IT workers. These IT workers are associated with highly qualified, high quality educational institutions, and then this gives it like a high tech industry, but also gives it a highly proficient IDF. But also you talk about other security, security sector. For example, it's a leader when it comes to spyware and cyber espionage, etc. And also in the realm of disinformation, as you know. The third pillar is that Israel enjoys a strong relationship with political elites in the West, especially in the United States. And this is rooted, of course, there's a lot of cynicism, there's a lot of, there's a lot of self-interest on the part of a lot of politicians, but it's really rooted in perceived shared identity. This is what they talk about, like basically that we're a Western country. Of course, keep in mind right now that the new elites of the country, which are religious nationalists, they emphasize we're a Middle Eastern country. But then again, the narrative is that this is a Western country. It has secular liberal values. It has Western values. It has democratic values, etc., or it's a democracy, etc. So it's rooted in not only a shared sense of values, but also a shared sense of identity. Western identity, Western values. The fourth pillar, I would say, is that Israel has been it has posed itself, and it has been for a very long time, geopolitically useful for Western countries. You see, when you have, I think I don't remember who it was, but it was, I think, an American figure. I'm not sure if it was a defense minister or a general who called Israel an unsinkable aircraft carrier. I don't know how Israelis feel about their country referred to as an aircraft carrier. Basically, I don't think it's very complimentary for your country basically to be a military base for use by others. But yeah, it's an important analogy to understand. Like for the rich oil reserves in the Middle East have been very important for world security, for world stability, and for the superiority of many countries, especially the United States, in a certain. I think this is in the past right now, but basically this was very important for a while, and it was useful to have an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the middle of a very turbulent region, which is crucial to your security. The fifth element, I would say, is geopolitics. Sorry, is the region around Israel, the brokenness and disunity of the Arab region. This is what allows a small population, 6.5 or 7 million Jewish people in Israel, to dictate their will upon a region of 500 million, half a billion Arab Muslims. Or if you want to talk about Arabs, it would be about 500 million. If you want to talk about Muslims, we're talking about a much larger population. But this is it. This is, if you want to take a strategic look at Israel. Israel basically is geopolitically very isolated. It is surrounded by it has not been able to integrate into the region. Of course, the Israelis would tell you it's because they hate us. The region would tell you because they didn't give us any other reason. It's not like they were dropping roses and solidarity on us for 75 years. They've been dropping bombs. So this means that Israel can only be successful and powerful in a world where it has a strong relationship with the West, and the world order itself was Western dominated. Of course, the West here, I think later in the conversation we might unpack the word West here, especially what's happening right now between Trump and Europe, and what's happening in Ukraine, etc. But these are the foundations of Israel's power. And what these things, by the way, this analysis was valid before October 7th. I didn't even come to October 7th yet. And all of these things were threatened. All of these pillars were basically being corroded even before October 7th. And, like when we talk about geopolitics, so there's two types of change that we have to look for. So there is change which is dramatic. It's sudden change. It captures the news. Something, for example, like the fall of the Assad regime, for example, a huge geopolitical event. Something, for example, like October 7th, like huge geopolitical event, and has it has its own consequences and captures the attention of everybody, etc. Current things that are happening with the U.S. administration, again, captures the news cycle. When it comes to geopolitical thinking, what we need to understand is that these emergent events are created by trends. They're created by slow-moving trends that have been in place for a very long time, and that create most of the change that we see. In a way, strategists have to live in the future, and we have to kind of, in a way, what's going to happen in the world next week or next month, in a way that the conditions for this happening has already been set years ago. So in strategy, when we talk about geopolitical strategy, we have to be working now for things that would happen 5 years from now. In a certain way, there are things that will happen, bad things that we would like them to not happen, but in 2 or 3 months that we can't really stop. The trends behind them are just too strong. So the other kind of change is what I call glacial change. It's inexorable, slow, but it's inexorable in a sense, first of all, that it moves mountains, it digs into the earth, it changes everything, it changes the landscape of the earth. But also it's very slow moving to the point you kind of ignore it. On a day-to-day basis, it's just in the background, like you don't really think about it so much. But it's very difficult to stop. In the realm of geopolitics, there are certain things which are of this nature. Economic trends are one, demographic trends, even geographic trends sometimes, like when it comes to climate change, etc. A lot of the things that I'm talking about here, when it comes to these foundations of Israeli power, it's of this variety, and that's why, like I said before, these things were in place long before October 7th. October 7th happened in the context of these changes, and it has been an accelerator. It didn't really change the course. It basically accelerated a lot of these things. I also see the current U.S. administration, and even like Netanyahu himself as a figure. Trump, I see, is an accelerator for a lot of things that are pushing towards American decline. A retreat of America from its superpower position to something different. And I see Israel as well. Netanyahu basically as he presents himself as a statesman, etc. But he is also an instrument or an agent of Israeli decline. So if we go back to these 5 things, and if I would tell you why these 5 things are being corroded.
Let's build on that. Maybe explain to me the glacial trends that are eroding these 5 foundational pillars of what you say is the Israeli state.
So without going into too much details, because you could write books about this, and books have been written about this. I would point actually to a book written in 2017. It's called "How Long Will Israel Survive?" It's written by Greg Karlstrom, is a journalist. I think he's Israeli himself. He lived in Israel for a long time, and what astounds me when I read the book, it's 2017, many years ago. The trends are the same. I mean, he's talking about things that really have not changed. There's also books written in 2013 about the demographic balance in Israel, and again, you see that the trends basically have held. So when it comes to the first, which is the high value industry, high value, um, industrial base, which is also supported by a high value and high quality academic institutions. The actual creators of the main skilled professionals who are the creators, the drivers of most of the economic vitality of the country are actually not that many. I have read in certain analyses that there are somewhere between 50,000 to 400,000 professionals. So you're talking about a country of 7 million Jewish citizens. The economy itself, the power base of the economy is really, it's being carried by 400,000 or so people. This economic base is shrinking for two reasons. The first is a trend. The trend basically is that there's the demographics of the country are shifting. The country itself is, the secular liberal elites of the country, who tend to be overrepresented in this 400,000 people. They, how do I say this? They don't have a lot of kids. The country itself has, the country itself is not shrinking. Why? Because you have ultra-Orthodox Jewish people, basically Haredim, who have on average like 7 kids per woman, 7-point-something kids per woman. And then you have the secular liberal elites who, some of them don't have kids, and some of them have, 1 or 2 children. So demographically speaking, this has created a situation where Israeli census itself predicts that by 2030 something, I forgot the exact date, 1/3 of all Israeli Jews will be ultra-Orthodox. Now, I'm not saying that the ultra-Orthodox are, less intelligent or less capable or something, but there are certain facts. The ultra-Orthodox identity, first of all, is pretty strong. There are many people who have been hoping that the ultra-Orthodox can be integrated into general society. They can, they can be somehow taught or, to be less ultra-Orthodox, but this has not happened. Ultra-Orthodox identity is actually pretty strong. But then the important thing to know about the ultra-Orthodox is their view on life is different. Their view on the worldview is very different. A lot of them are actually not even Zionists. They're non-Zionists. I think I don't know if I'll be accurate enough to say that the majority of anti-Zionists or non-Zionists in Israel are actually of the ultra-Orthodox. They believe in the land of Israel rather than the state of Israel. But then again, some of them are. I mean, let's not get caught up on this point, because this is, in the end, they are Israeli citizens. These are not they're not providing. You see, this industry has an attrition rate. There are people who retire. There are people who move abroad, etc. We'll come to that. But you need to be hiring new people. You need to be educating new people. And the educational system, the educational situation in Israel right now is segmented, because the ultra-Orthodox, I think, according to the Shoresh Institute, the Shoresh Institute is basically an educational institute in Israel that has been doing a lot of these very important research about these long-term trends. And I believe this was before October 7th. They had this lecture, which you can find, I think you can find even on YouTube. The title is "Teach Your Children Well," and they're talking about how the ultra-Orthodox get less than a third world, kind of like a third world level of education. So it's a segmented society where people in big cities get, like children in big cities will get a good education, but then the ultra-Orthodox and the Arab citizens of Israel get really a low quality education. These are not the kind of, this is not going to be the population that can, replenish this core of economic productivity. By the way, this itself has been cited in a report that was written in May of last year, May of 2024, by two they describe themselves as two of the architects of the Israeli system. Professor Eugene Kandel, along with Ron Tsur, they describe themselves as architects of the Israeli governance system, and they wrote. So they're basically into futurist studies. And in last year in May, they released this report, which actually prophesied that Israel, as it is now, is not going to live long enough to see its 100th birthday. It's not going to survive to 2020 to 2048. This is their conclusion, and they cited this point specifically. This point about the educational system, and it's more than just the educational system, because when your demographics are shifting that much, the ultra orthodox also are they consume more in taxes than they produce in economic activity. A lot of them don't work because the men are at least, like, some of the men work, and a lot of them are dedicated to Torah study. They believe that their contribution to the state is through study, basically keeping alive the Jewish tradition, and basically having the spiritual connection, and protecting the state, or the society, basically the Israeli society, spiritually. But yeah, let's wrap up basically the first point, which is the high value tech output. The demographic base below it is shrinking, and also there's an emergent crisis that actually accelerated this, which is before the October 7th, started before October 7th, which is the judicial reform protests. So the judicial reform protests, to a lot of the world, we really don't understand it the way that a lot of Israelis understand it. We think that the judicial reform protests were about democracy. And maybe to the average Jewish Israeli, they understand democracy in these terms. And of course, we know that Israel is an apartheid state. So long it has total control over a population which do not get to vote, that's apartheid. The way that I would look at it, and I think a lot of Israeli Jews also look at it, is that the judicial reform signaled elite capture. It's a change of elites, where it's basically this moment where the elites of the country, the control of the state, is going from the previous secular liberal elites, the secular liberal energy in this country, to religious nationalists. There's also an underlying ethnic factor here to consider, because the secular liberal elites were mostly Ashkenazi, and the religious nationalists, a lot of them are in fact Mizrahim, basically Middle Eastern and Arab Jews, or descendants of Middle Eastern and Arab Jews. So this itself has accelerated, because, as I said, the secular liberal Ashkenazis. I'm oversimplifying here, but again, I'm sometimes you have to do that for the sake of telling the story properly. They have been leaving. A lot of them have been leaving Israel because they're kind of in despair about the state of the country, a country that was basically is going to be captured by religious nationalists, a country that they might not want to live in. I mean, a lot of Israelis. And a lot of these Israelis, the high-value, highly economically productive Israelis, don't want to live in a country which is led by Ben Gvir or Smotrich. They have a different view on. I mean, again, they are Israelis, and they believe in the Israeli system. They believe in Israel, even like they might actually be supportive of the apartheid policies of Israel, but they don't want to live in a country where they are dominated by religious nationalists. So this is the first pillar, which is basically why. The economic vitality of the state itself is threatened. The second we come to the IDF itself, and you can see why. If you're not replenishing this core, the IDF itself will start to suffer. The IDF itself, we can see that it has been through several crises. Of course, maybe we need like a different assessment to how the IDF did in the war in Gaza. Of course, the IDF has superior firepower, but I think a case can be made that the IDF actually do not know how to fight close quarters commando style urban warfare. This is why I think I mean a lot of us are really disgusted when they, for example, destroy an entire neighborhood, rubble the entire place, the entire area. Of course, it's a war crime. It's an act of genocide. But we have to also look at it from a military point of view. If Israel had it was competent in its ability for urban warfare, it would not have to do that. It would actually go in with its commandos. It didn't do that. It rubbled the entire area so that it can walk in with the tanks. And even the tanks. I mean, we've seen a lot of videos from Hamas itself about how they actually attack the tanks. Normally, when you go in, the tanks are basically, the tanks and the infantry go in together. But in many cases, we've seen that the tanks are going in. I mean, with the express, basically the tanks are moving in very fast because they know that they're going to be exposed to a lot of traps on the way. Anyway, so to zoom out a little bit, so I said that the first foundation, which is high value economy, high value educational institutions, this is basically being undermined by demographic forces and the change in the identity of the country and the elites of the country. This itself would immediately impact the technological superiority of the IDF. But again, I have questions also about the superiority of the IDF right now. We can see that the IDF has very low discipline. We've seen, for example, how the soldiers themselves have several times attempted to defy their own leaders. This happened in the course of the year. There's this polarization, very deep polarization in Israeli society, and of course, it also spills over into the army. But let's go on to the third pillar, which is
just also. I mean, just while you're on the second one, just the Haredi Jews. They are they the same unorthodox group who refused to be drafted into the IDF, right?
They are. So they're ultra orthodox. They refuse to be drafted into the IDF. They believe that they do so there are different groups. But this is this matter is very, very they feel about this very, very strongly, to the point that I mean, there were debates in Israel about what would happen if you force us, and I think one of the chief rabbis actually said, "We'll just leave Israel. We'd rather leave Israel than be forced to fight in the army."
So the first one basically feeds into the second one. The demographic
absolutely.
shift sort of weakens the IDF even further. Yep.
So of course there's been some attempts to actually draft the Haredim into the army. There is some progress, but it's very slow. It's not a tide change. It's not like a tidal change. It's like a trickle, and I don't think it's going to be. Doesn't change the trend. The trend basically stands where it is. So now we'll talk about the third item, which is the strong relationship with the West. Keep in mind that the strong relationship with the West. I mean, maybe it's useful to actually start from the fourth one, which is the Unsinkable aircraft carrier. Why did the U.S. or the West in general want an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the middle of the Middle East? Well, it was really two things. The first, it was the oil, and the second, it was terrorism. And I think the oil itself was a consequence. The terrorism itself was a consequence of Western, the Western intervention based on its need for this oil. And we know that the United States, basically the oil market itself has shifted. The United States, I think, in the late Obama era, I'm not sure about my numbers, but I think in the late Obama era, the United States itself became self-sufficient when it comes to oil. I think the U.S. at this moment exports more oil than it uses, so it's a net exporter of oil. And I think the shale oil kind of explosion, or the shale oil revolution, basically made a big difference when it comes to that. So the Middle East, I think there's an incident that happened in 2019, I think, which was kind of instructive. I lived long enough to see, I grew up in the Gulf states themselves. I mean, I was born in Kuwait and I grew up in the United Arab Emirates. And as I was growing up, I saw the first Iraq War, the second Iraq War, the period in between. There was a period of time in which, if anybody threatens Gulf oil, half the U.S. Navy can be raining hellfire on them within hours, if not days. And then you go to 2019 with the Abqiq attack, where there was a drone attack on the largest oil refinery in the world during the Trump administration. So it happened in 2019, and I think It's not clear whether the attack itself came from southern Iraq or from Yemen. Um, and the United States at that time, I think the United States under Trump threatened to attack Iran, and then they stood down. But we see, like, when I compare the reaction, when I compare basically how it was such a red line: don't touch the oil, because then American an aircraft carrier is going to appear just outside your shores. To a situation where okay, it's not good. It's not good for oil prices, not good for global security, but it's not exactly that crucial for American security. This is even before we consider things like the green transition, for example, the fact that we have to actually move on from fossil fuels, etc. So what I'm trying to say here is that the Middle East is not as geopolitically crucial for the security of the United States or Europe, etc. Europe is a different factor, because Europe is stuck. Europe is stuck to the Middle East. We're neighbors geopolitically, geographically. But the United States basically does not really need to invest that much of energy into the Middle East as much as it had to before. And this basically sets the stage for the fourth point, which is actually the third point, which is the strong relationship with elites in the West. Look, as Israel, of course, this is accelerated by the situation in Gaza and the genocide in Gaza, but there was a point of time where Israel for the West meant a democracy of mostly persecuted Jews, or survivors of the Holocaust, etc., who are secular and liberal, and even socialists in some contexts, and they are the good guys, and they are surrounded by bad guys. This was basically the simplistic narrative that a lot of people in the West basically grew up with, especially in the 1950s, 1960s, after 1967, etc. This is not today's Israel. Today's Israel, there's an entire generation in the world and the West which is growing up, and this is the Israel they see. It's an Israel that is religious nationalist. It's an Israel that is an apartheid state, as stated by Israeli human rights organizations, global human rights organization, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, etc. Israelis themselves, like B'Tselem, etc., issuing reports about the reality of Israeli apartheid. And this is something which is, maybe Israel can try as much as possible to use this disinformation, to the narrative warfare, to basically shoot it down. But it's very convincing to a lot of people in the world. So this is different. Like this is an Israel which is going to have a hard time. It's already having a hard time telling a new generation of Europeans, of people in the West, that we are like you. We are like you when it comes to our values. We are like you when it comes to when it comes to our what do you say, our attitude towards the world, our attitude towards international law, internationalism, etc. This is different Israel. The Bidens of the world and the Trumps of the world, like you see, they're in their 80s. This is a dying generation. There is a new generation that's going to come, and like if you think basically about someone who's growing up during this is their awakening, their political awakening. They're maybe 18, 19, maybe early 20s during the Gaza genocide. This is their first introduction to world affairs, is the Gaza genocide. You can see where these people will be in their careers in 15 years, in the mid 2030s or late 2030s. These people are going to be in leadership positions, and their attitudes are going to be different. Their societies are going to be different. It's going to be very difficult for Israel to continue to sell itself as a Western ally in political union, or values union, etc., with the West.
And then the fifth point is the Arab unity.
So we're talking about the fifth point. The fifth point is basically the unity of the Arab world and really the brokenness of the Arab region. And I think this is a wild card because the Arab Spring came out of nowhere. Nobody could predict it before it happened. I mean, I lived in the region myself, and I didn't see it coming. Even the people who went to the squares in 2011 didn't know that this was going to become an Arab Spring. Like, we didn't really know what was happening. And I think the fact that it came out of nowhere increases the paranoia and the constant anxiety of Arab regimes, and also people who would like the current Arab political order to continue. So it's a wild card. Maybe there's, we still see revolutions. We've seen the last round of revolution was 2019, right before COVID. It's not out of and we just saw, for example, the collapse of the Assad regime. This is a region which is still in flux, and many things can happen.
I wanna just hone in a bit on the fifth point, which is a wild card, and so I know that there's no fixed answers on that. But how do you think? And I mean, there was kind of signs of this in the Arab response to Trump's plan. But how do you think the war in Gaza has maybe has impacted the region as it exists now, with its de facto, I'm going to call them illegitimate regimes in charge? How it affects their relationship with the U.S. specifically, but also has it made the regimes more fragile?
I'm not so sure if it actually made these regimes more fragile. Some regimes, of course, have become more fragile. For example, the Assad regime fell. For example, the Jordanian and Egyptian regimes are directly targeted right now when it comes to Trump's Gaza Riviera plans. So absolutely, they have reasons to be very worried. I also think that Saudi Arabia, at least Mohammed bin Salman's plans for Vision 2030, also were premised upon some kind of integration with Israeli technology, which again, this is off the table right now. So there are factors, for example, like the United Arab Emirates, which again based its Abrahamic Accords in 2020, basically set the stage for what we saw in Gaza eventually. So there are reasons to see that there's movement, but I'm not so sure that this has. I mean, the Arab public for a very long time already knew that these regimes are illegitimate. The decision for people not to rebel, not to revolt, is not really a matter of acquiescence. It's not really basically that enthusiastic acceptance of the regime. A lot of the time, it's basically either fear or fear of the alternative. A lot of the time, people stick with something really, really terrible because they don't know what's going to replace it. And I think a lot of the history of the region after 2011 kind of talks to that. That said, it's a fact that the Arab regional order has been kind of in crisis. I mean, there's a deep legitimacy crisis that really extends decades, and it really hits. I think the situation right before COVID was very dangerous for a lot of these regimes. COVID kind of like hit pause on that. I'm not completely. So there's trends, and then there's the regimes themselves and how they react to it. And I don't think the regimes are skilled enough to navigate the big changes that we have coming ahead of us. That said, I think that since the current Trump push for ethnic cleansing of Gaza, the way that the Arab regimes have stood against that, and again, they stood against that for their own self-interest. I mean, they don't want to slit their own throats. They want to continue to be in power, etc. And we can talk a bit about that. But they were able to sell this to their own people as saying that we are steadfast, we're with Palestine, we're steadfast against Israel, etc. And sometimes that is effective. So yeah, I don't think it's. Maybe I'm not seeing things as clearly as I should. Maybe I should look at this a little bit more closely. But I don't think that the events in Gaza have been fundamental in it. They haven't fundamentally changed the relationship between public and ruler in the region. I think this relationship has been really terrible for a very long time, and this is just another reason why it's terrible.
And how has it potentially changed the relationship? And maybe it's got more to do with just the glacial trend you were speaking about. But how is the relationship with the region, excluding Israel, the Arab region, changing with the U.S.?
So even before Biden, I mean, really dramatic things happened between Trump's first term, starting 2017, inaugurated 2017, and then Biden and then Trump again. In Trump's first term, if you remember, certain Arab regimes were very excited about Trump's presidency, especially the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, of course, was particularly dramatic because when Trump was inaugurated in 2017, Mohammed bin Salman was not yet. He was the deputy crown prince. He wasn't yet the crown prince. And the events in these 4 years, of course, included the siege of Qatar, They included the deposing of the crown prince, and then Mohammed bin Salman became the crown prince. Bin Nayef was basically sidelined, and then of course we saw the persecution of the overtaking of the public sphere in September of 2017, the arrest of more than 100 intellectuals. Then the Ritz incident, for example, in early 2018, if I remember correctly, the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, 2018, and then the aftermath of that. Basically, the Saudi regime, the current regime led by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, used the Trump era, and the United Arab Emirates, of course, was right behind them, and the Israelis were also right behind them. It was like providing diplomatic cover, lobbying, disinformation support, technological support, spyware, etc. So it was clear that there was a coherent, undeclared alliance that used the Trump administration to secure, or at least what they thought at the time, securing their own interests. Biden's era started with, on a shaky foundation, because Biden, of course, had I don't know if he regrets it or not, but basically he came in and he said that we're going to restore America to a worldview of human rights, etc., which really America never had. So I don't know what he's restoring it to. But of course, immediately after that, there was like this backtracking. So he decided to double down on the Abrahamic Accords. He decided, of course, to pull out of Afghanistan. He decided to do this, to have this kind of reconciliation with Mohammed bin Salman, which really didn't really go that far, didn't really go that well for Biden. Because Biden and Sullivan and his team basically wanted normalization. Mohammed bin Salman was very skilled in dangling normalization, but really he already has what he needs. I mean, in 2017, he wanted power. He wanted to consolidate his power and his rule in Saudi Arabia. In 2022, 2023, he already had that power. So there's no need for him to actually. I mean, he had all of the benefits of having a close relationship with Israel without the he had the technology, he had the diplomatic support, he had all of that, but he didn't really. There's no need for him to rock the boat too much and to introduce risk when he's trying to do something sensitive, which is his Vision 2030 project. Around 2022, the situation, you see the relationship between the United States and its key allies in the region used to be institutional. It used to be an institutional relationship. It used to be an actual alliance. And by 2022 or so, again, after the shock of Trump and Biden, and after, of course, the Ukraine war, etc., the relationship started to look very different. It started to look transactional. It started to look like these Gulf Arab allies got the message that Israel and I mean, of course, the part of the idea of normalizing with Israel was basically as a hedge against Iranian hegemony and a kind of security guarantee. They kind of got the message that America is not really interested in securing guaranteeing the security of another country. Especially that, again, the oil is not as important as it used to be. Geopolitically speaking, it's mostly the United States is mostly interested in countering China. With Trump right now, we see it's not even interested in European security. It's really, really boosting security in the Pacific, but really reducing it everywhere else. So I think they got that message, and I think that they started reaching out to other powers. They started reaching out to the Russians, to the Chinese, etc. Started diversifying their weapons purchases, their alliances, their trade agreements, etc. So again, this is a slow moving trend. A lot of Arab public, they think that the relationship between Arab regimes and America is that America says jump and the Arab regimes say how high. It's no longer the case. I mean, it might have been the case at some point when they were completely reliant, completely dependent upon American security. But in this moment, I don't think it's true at all. There's also the fact that I think partly because of, I mean, ironically, partly because of Israel's success against Hezbollah in since October 7th, the Iranian proxy, the Iranian grip on the region has become a lot less less secure. And really, the environment after October 7th really saw an improvement in the relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and Iran and the United Arab Emirates. I think partly because Saudi Arabia did not want to be part of the war. It did not want to be, it did not want to be seen as an ally of Israel in this case. So the foundations of this alliance between the United States and the Gulf Arab allies have shifted significantly since the 1990s or the early 2000s, or like after 9/11. And I think we need to adjust our biases here.
Okay, so it sounds like, I mean, because the specifically the point of normalization, it's not usually what's said. Usually the idea is that both the Israelis are probably more reluctant to do normalization now because they want a greater Israel, or that the Saudis are still very keen on it. But you seem to be saying that both parties aren't interested now, and it's really almost going to be Trump holding a candle by himself, calling for normalization, while everyone else just kind of nods and winks and doesn't do it.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Trump himself, actually, I don't think Trump is going to invest too much political capital into the Middle East. Yeah, I know that he's going to talk about his plan, is going to put out AI videos, etc. The question is he going to do something really serious about it? I don't think he will. I think his main project, Trump's main project, is securing his grip on America. He is an American authoritarian, and controlling America is his main project. A lot of what he's doing really is also for domestic consumption. So I don't think he's going to put in a lot of work or effort or a lot of political capital into that. That said, he's going to say, "Yeah, I did the Abrahamic Accords, and you guys, you didn't preserve it, or whatever. Or it's Hamas's fault or Iran's fault or whatever." That said, I follow Israeli media closely, and the narrative about normalization is still being said, is still being carried, even though it is contradictory, because on the one hand there is talk about securing, basically not trusting anyone in the region, not trusting anyone at all, and taking out any capacity in the region before it becomes a threat. It can become a threat to Israel. But again, once in a while you see a story about normalization. So once in a while you see that. I don't think it's in Saudi Arabia's interest, because not only because of the political cost over here. Basically, Israel will never allow a Palestinian state. And Saudi Arabia has publicly said, we will only normalize with Israel if there is a Palestinian state. This is not going to happen. Israel will never allow it. But also, I think, from a practical point of view, like I said, for MBS, for Mohammed bin Salman, a lot has shifted. Normalization is off the table. But for him, I think normalization in 2017, there was a reason why in 2017 and even in 2022, he would say that I'm working on normalization. I would like to see normalization, because he was still not secure. He needed to secure his position as the most powerful man who's completely controlling politics and society in Saudi Arabia. Once he is secure, and he is now, I mean, he is the undisputed ruler of Saudi Arabia right now, there's no reason to introduce risk. Why open a new risky endeavor? You don't know what it's going to do. You don't know what's going to come with it. It's just risky. And Mohammed bin Salman, he's many things. And of course, I have my own deep reservations about his Vision 2030 and even economic point of view. But he's not an idiot. And he does calculate risk well.
Okay, so where does this leave the Palestinians? I mean, because it sounds like I do agree with you that Trump, a lot of what he says in the Middle East is just theater. He doesn't have the stamina or the capacity or the interest to actually carry through with it. Israel is very belligerent at the moment. They're still striking Syria. They are continuing. I mean, they've just stopped aid into Gaza. They seem not keen on all at actually going through and following through with the ceasefire, which is not surprising. They've escalated in the West Bank. And the other Arab parties have said no to ethnic cleansing of Gaza, but doesn't look like they're going to come to the party or defense in any way to the Palestinians. They wouldn't have after 15 months of genocide, so why would they do it now? So, and then you've also mentioned that there's a slow sort of collapsing, I won't even call it collapsing, but almost like erosion of the Israeli state, right? But where does that leave the Palestinians for the next 10 to 15 years? Both in Gaza and the West Bank.
Yeah, and this is the question. We also have to include not only Gaza and the West Bank, but Palestinians generally, Palestinians in the diaspora as well. Because in many cases, we talk about Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank for good reason, because they're directly facing Israeli persecution, and they are the ones who are on the land. But it's also important to talk about what Palestinians in diaspora, their role, because they have a big role in this. So the first thing I want to add is that Israel is different. Israel has changed after October 7th. In a way, there is part of Israeli character was this always, but Israel after October 7th is an Israel which is aggressive. Again, it was always aggressive, but this Israel believes that its existence in this region depends upon intimidating and destroying everyone around them, destroying everyone who can even think, who even has the capacity of hurting them. This is an Israel which, I mean, in saying it another way, it's an Israel that looks at capacity and not as intention. If you have the capacity to hurt it, it would like to destroy you before it won't actually trust your intentions. This is what's happening in Syria, for example. They don't trust the new government, and they're like, as soon as any kind of capacity arises, we're going to go in and bomb it, and we need to maintain this freedom to do this. Situation is different, of course, with the bigger countries, with Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, etc. But I wouldn't be surprised if at some point this also becomes a matter of, if things worsen significantly, and they might. If we can see, we see also Israeli sabotage when it comes to the two big countries, Jordan and Egypt. You mentioned that the big countries are not going to come in support of the Palestinians after 15 years of genocide. But I think the ethnic cleansing plan changes things for these countries, for Jordan and Egypt. Even Sisi, I think. We talk about it now as if the ethnic cleansing plans are new. But then, if you remember, in November and December of 2023, Biden was actually entertaining some of these ideas, and what's his name? Blinken at the time actually flew. He came to, he went to Jordan, he went to Egypt, and he was flouting the idea, basically, like, of course, at the time he wasn't actually saying permanently they're going to leave permanently. He was going to saying that, humanitarian, etc. Let's let them finish the job, and then we can send the refugees back, which of course we know it's a big lie. But this itself, I mean, we were talking earlier about the change of the relationship between the United States and its allies. Something really serious happens when you, as an ally, ask your ally. Supposedly, this is a relationship of mutual interest. When you ask your ally to do something which is really terrible for them, when you ask them to slit their own throat, to destroy their own security for you, why should an ally even do that? And the fact that you're asking, it means that you're not an ally anymore. And this is what happened with the United States under Biden, let alone under Trump. I think it's important also to set the context for the viewer. Like, why do we say that this is so dangerous for Egypt and Jordan? Why is it that Egypt and Jordan could never, even if they wanted to, they can't accept ethnic cleansing of Gaza? Well, in the case of Jordan, so historically speaking, the movement of large groups of people destabilizes regimes, especially when these regimes are already fragile. When it comes to Lebanon, for example, one of the preceding incidents of the civil war in Lebanon in 1975, which lasted until 1990, was that Palestinian fighters, in order for them to fight Israel, moved into southern Lebanon and started to basically attack Israel from there. And this basically precipitated everything when it comes to 1975, the war in southern Lebanon, and then the creation of Shia militant groups, Amal, which later basically merged into Hezbollah, and the occupation, the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon. But that destabilized the Lebanese political system for 15 years, arguably until now, really. In the case of Jordan, again, there was such an incident in Jordan because, again, Palestinian fighters eventually, large group of people moving into Jordan, they started to attack Israel from Jordan. There was the Black September incident where basically it's some even refer to it as the Jordanian Civil War. It was a war between the Jordanian state and Palestinian militants, which ended up with the Palestinian militants having to leave Jordan. I think the sequence of events is that they eventually left to Lebanon, and then they left Lebanon to Tunisia. So there is a history there that whenever you have a large movement of people, of Palestinians, into frontier countries which share a border with Israel, is going to be destabilizing, first of all, because a lot of these Palestinians will want to go home and will want to continue to fight Israel. So they will immediately present a security problem for both Israel and for the country in which they live. The populations of these countries, when it comes to Jordan, 80%, around 80%, of course, Jordan has existed for 3-4 generations now. So initially, there's been a lot of intermixture between the original Jordanians and the Palestinians, and by today, over 80% of Jordanians have some either full or partial Palestinian ancestry, and they believe they believe very strongly in the cause. So when you have the potential for destabilizing the Jordanian regime, again, is not a very it's a regime which is dependent upon the balance of power in the region. It's not a country which is rich in natural resources, for example. It is a country which is, again, dependent upon a lot of aid from other countries, but it's a very important country because it's kind of a cornerstone country, a keystone country, because if that country collapses, it's an enormous amount of instability that spills over everywhere in the Levant and into Arabia. So for Jordan, it would be, I would say, lethally destabilizing. It could literally lead to the fall of the regime. It's an existential threat to Jordan. When it comes to Egypt, Egypt has the size to absorb 1 million or 2 million people because the 100 million, it's a very large country. But then Egypt is, again, the Egyptian national character, Egyptian regime itself was forged in conflict with Israel. Every president of Egypt until Sisi, before Sisi, every president of Egypt from Jamal Abdel Nasser, Naguib, Nasser, Sadat, Mubarak, they all made their name in fights in wars against Israel. That's how their career was made in wars against Israel. Sisi was the first one, basically born in the region, in the aftermath of that. So Egypt is a reservoir of manpower who can be activated in militancy against Israel. So, and I think Sisi himself said this. Sisi himself, when he was basically trying to counter Biden's plan in late 2023 and early 2024, he said that how are you going to stop recruitment if you move Palestinians into Egypt, into Sinai? First of all, how are you going to contain them? And if you contain them, how are you going to stop them? Basically, you'll have to keep them in a concentration camp. If you don't, you can't do that. It's not sustainable. You can't do that forever. Eventually, you will have to somehow integrate them into Egyptian economy, Egyptian society, etc. And that, again, can be extremely destabilizing and not really it's not a really good outcome for Israel itself. I don't think Israel would like to see a new kind of militant group operating on Egyptian soil with 100 million Egyptians behind their backs. In fact, it gives them even more, strategic depth. And I don't think, again, it would be a huge problem for Egypt. So when it comes to Jordan, it's lethal. It's almost lethal to the regime. When it comes to Egypt, it's very destabilizing to the regime. I wouldn't say it's as dangerous to Egypt as it is to Jordan, but it is also very, very dangerous. So this is the reason why these countries cannot accept this. They can't accept the ethnic cleansing plan, and this is why currently the conversation in Israel, including by Ben Gvir, Smotrich, and right-wing leaders, including Netanyahu and his aides, they're not really talking about moving. They were talking about moving them into Egypt and Jordan. I think they moved on from that, and they're talking about a third country. I don't know what the third country is or what it can be, and I don't think this is going to work. Their plan seems to be more has evolved into kind of a slow-moving plan where they want to make life in Gaza, make Gaza unlivable, and then allow people to leave somehow. Again, for them to allow people to leave, they have to somehow collaborate with Egypt, and so far Egypt is not playing.
So no, I get the analysis. I don't. Just to come back to the question, then. So and it does seem like that unfortunately, it just seems like the Palestinians in Gaza, and specifically, but also in the West Bank, as they continue expulsions and home demolitions and step up military offensive, are just basically at the mercy of what Israel dictates. Until when? When is the breaking point?
Yeah, so this is what I was coming to, and thank you for reminding me, because at a point, I mean, we're used to Jordan and Egypt being almost allies of Israel, like basically having very close security relations and close security coordination with Israel. So we're kind of used to that. Um, but what I want to say is that don't underestimate how quickly this can change if the regimes themselves start to feel that Israel is threatening their existence, their security at an existential level. I'm not going to be surprised if the Jordanians and the Egyptians start actually assisting Palestinian resistance at some point. I don't see it as outside the realm of possibility. If they feel like actually helping Palestinian resistance will stave off an ethnic cleansing plan that can destabilize them, they would see it as part of their self-interest. They wouldn't really be doing it, for because of values or because of morality or something. But basically, there will be an alignment of interest over there. And I think there was a statement from the Jordanian government maybe a month ago, which said something like that. Said something like, "We would rather go to war than accept an ethnic cleansing plan." When it says go to war, I don't really think they're actually going to enter there with their army, but rather you would see a more lax attitude towards Palestinian militants.
Okay, I just want to move on now and speak a bit about Saudi Arabia. You've mentioned it previously. You've mentioned MBS. To a large extent, Saudi Arabia, if you go back about a decade ago, was MBS was almost like the getting tutelage and mentorship from MBZ in the UAE. And we've now reached the station, as you've already said, where MBS is very secure in power. It's very foreseeable that he will be the ruler of Saudi Arabia for a long time. Outside of, I mean, it's more like his threat isn't family politics. His threat is regime change more than anything else. And Saudis, I guess, have mixed feelings about MBS as much as they can express. I mean, there's a massive sort of, I don't know how to call it. I mean, it's not really a secularizing project, but it's a project of, it's not really even de-Islamization. Like, I don't actually know what to call the project, but I think our viewers are familiar with what the project is, right? It's trying to modernize Saudi Arabia very quickly, at the same time keep it very autocratic. Do you think this will be sustainable? Do you think Saudi is going to be better off in 10 years than what it was 10 years ago? And it's a complex question because reflexively most people say no. And that's more because I think it's their anti-dictatorial sort of bias which is coming through. But I think it's a bit more complex than that. He can be a dictator, and maybe the society is getting better, right? Potentially. How do you see that?
So, I mean, to answer your question, the essence of your question is Saudi Arabia going to be better off in 10 years or not? I don't think it would be. But I think there are certain things, there are certain trends. Again, we're talking about slow-moving trends. I think the 2030s probably will also be a very, very hard decade for Saudi Arabia as well. As we talked about how it's going to be a difficult decade for Israel, but I think it's going to be a hard decade for the Saudi regime as well. Look, at the core of Vision 2030 is an attempt to. We're talking about modernization and changing society, etc. That's not the core. This is kind of the cherry on top. The main, the main meat of the matter, really, is economic change. This is a country that is dependent upon oil. The world is changing. The world is moving on from fossil fuels. Fossil fuels continue to be important for a very long time, but again, it's a country that needs to modernize its economy. It needs to move it needs to find another way to be prosperous and to be powerful, etc. Keep in mind that region of the world, Arabia, for a very long time, since the Umayyads moved, it was Ali bin Abi Talib who moved the capital from Medina to Iraq, and from that point, the center of cultural power, political power, etc., in the Arab region, the Muslim world, really never came back to Medina. It was always like a spiritual place, a spiritual area, but not really a cultural and economic powerhouse. And it didn't have a large, population. It was not really an important country until recent times, until modern times, when, of course, largely because of the oil, not to complicate the situation, the narrative a lot more, but basically largely because of the oil, it became a very important country and really a center of both power, wealth, and recently, of course, cultural activity as well. So we have to understand Vision 2030 and MBS's project. And again, I'm saying MBS's project, but really this was many people's project. I mean, MBS really did this thing where to present himself as a reformer, he had to put in prison every reformer who had any idea. So, like Issam al-Zamil, for example, wrote a lot. Like he wrote a lot of excellent thoughts. He's currently in prison. Excellent. He's an economist. And he wrote a lot of thoughts about this economic transformation. This, like, basically, how are we going to move to a post oil state? How are we going to remain relevant in the world, etc. Issam al-Zamil at the time said that it cannot be done. It's a generational project. It can't be done in a few years. When we talk, for example, about religious reform, again, there is, like, for example, Hassan Farhan al-Maliki, who was currently again in prison, when he spoke about basically the need to kind of reassess the role of Wahhabism and what it did to the world, what it did to Islam in the world, what it did to society. When it comes to politics, there was Jamal Khashoggi, as you know what happened to him, and he was talking about reform. So there were, like, I kind of cringe a little bit when I talk about MBS as a reformer, because there's no society in which only one guy knows what's going on, or just one guy who's smart and everybody else has to just follow him. This just doesn't make sense. Saudis are smart. There are lots of very smart and educated Saudis who know what's good for their country. Anyway, the foundation, the foundation is the economy. The foundation is how do we transport, how do we transform our economy to an economy that can remain high value, highly productive, but not dependent upon oil. When MBS started this project, 2016, 2015, when he, after the death of, I think it was late 2014 or early 2015, when King Abdullah died, and when MBS became the defense minister at the time, and he entered politics, he had one model of a country, not really a country, really an emirate in the Gulf states, which actually did this. It actually was completely dependent on oil, and then managed to transform itself into a hub for finance, a hub for real estate development, for media, and of course for tourism. And that's Dubai. Dubai is the only, it's not a country, it's the only political unit, let's say, it's an emirate, in the region that actually managed to do this. So MBS basically took the Dubai plan, the Dubai print, the Dubai basically blueprint. Dubai did this in Dubai started doing this in 2002, so it had a long time, it had a long runway. And it had the advantage of having, being integrated into the United Arab Emirates, where basically other states, other emirates such as Abu Dhabi could basically guarantee some of the loans and make sure that the transition is basically financially possible. Dubai also had excellent infrastructure. It had excellent, even before it started to do this, it had excellent energy infrastructure, an excellent port, an excellent airport. It had a reputation for competent governance, and I lived there at the time, so I can tell you that people looked up to Dubai as a place that works. This is even before this push to change and to change the economy, etc. So all of these factors, and of course also the new development, the new Dubai, or the new developments basically were very strategic place. So Dubai Silicon Oasis, Dubai Media City, Dubai Internet City, all of these free zones were strategically placed right next, like it was accessible, very close to the port, very close to the airport. So it was integrated into, like, it just fell into place. And that's why Dubai worked. And Dubai, of course, Dubai today, I think 92% or like over 90% of its GDP is actually non-oil, which is again a success story. Now let's talk about whether this is possible in Saudi Arabia and what MBS is doing. I would tell you, first of all, that I'll tell you something that Jamal Khashoggi actually told me, because when I had this discussion with Jamal, in 2018, a few months before he was murdered, and he said that the simplest answer he could have is Dubai is a city-state. Saudi Arabia is a nation. Saudi Arabia is not a city-state. It's too big for you to actually think that you can transform it so quickly and turn it into like it can't be done. Let's talk for example about Neom. So he wants to create a new city, but he creates the city literally in the middle of the desert where there's no existing infrastructure. It is not integrated with any population centers, so people have to move there. It's not exactly between Riyadh and another big city, for example, so it becomes accessible. And he bases this whole thing about this fantastical real estate development, the same, again, the Dubai blueprint, which in Dubai itself, like it's 20 years, so we know what worked and what didn't work. Dubai, for example, needed to create a lot of like those islands, for example, and the Palm, etc., to maximize real estate, sort of beachfront real estate, for example. But then Saudi Arabia maybe doesn't need that because it has a very long shoreline. So for some reasons, MBS decided that this is the manual to do. It has to be the same as the Dubai manual. Tourism, investing in certain industries, but then high tech. It's talking about artificial intelligence, computer games, etc. And I think that's a mistake. I think the idea. I think there are other there's this concept of opportunity cost, which is very important. It's a concept in economics, and briefly, what it means is that when I put my money in something, it's not only the cost that I actually bought this thing. So, for example, if I have a certain amount of money and I invest it in I buy stock, for example, in a particular company, it's not only the cost that I put in the stock, but now I don't have money to invest anywhere else. I could have invested in so many different things. I could have done so many different things with the money, but the moment I used it, I have taken off the menu several options that were available to me. And I'm afraid this is what's happening with Saudi Arabia, because this is a very expensive project. Neom is very expensive, and I don't think, even if this, I don't know if I call it utopian or dystopian. It's more dystopian than utopian. And many architects and many city planners told you that it can't be done. Like, you can't really build a line-shaped city. A lot of this is basically, sorry to say this, but bullshit. And when you sell it to like Western contractors and Western companies and Western consultants, then they're going to take your money. Like, they're not going to say, "Hey, this doesn't work." They don't care. They're just going to take your money, and then when the whole project fails, they say, "Yeah, I just took my money." My problem here is that this money is going into a failed project where it could have gone into something that could actually work. I mean, it's true, for example, that we have to rely less on fossil fuels, but then there are technologies that we can invest. At least we can try to invest into. There's, like, for example, material science, for example, graphene technology. There's the idea, for example, of converting the oil into hydrogen. Like basically refined oil into hydrogen, and then, or even ammonia, which can be used like multiple uses. There's investment in urban planning, for example. How do you actually build an efficient city in the desert that is sustainable and livable, etc.? By pouring so much money into this one project, I'm afraid that so much cash is going here that could have gone into other projects that could actually help make Saudi Arabia, not only Saudi Arabia, but really the Arab region, much more sustainable, much more livable, much more powerful in the coming decades. But let me pivot back to your point about the social changes. When it comes to this concept of social reform, I have to ask the question: could you not have done this without putting all of these people in prison? Like, could you not have actually accomplished what you wanted to accomplish, the social changes, etc., while giving some people some political rights? It's very clear to me. I mean, it's very clear to a lot of people that the whole Vision 2030, of course, there's the economic foundation, but there's a political project along with it. And the political project is to secure the Saudi state, the Saudi regime. There's, of course, a more private project, which is to change the order of succession and to make the Salman line the main line of the monarchy, which MBS so far seems to have succeeded in doing. But there's also really, like, if your power and privilege depends upon you running the state, you want the state to be powerful for a longer time. It's just a fact. I just don't think that what he's doing is the right investment or the right direction. I think a lot of money is being wasted. Money that the country and the region will need. It absolutely will need in the future because of the very unstable, very uncertain times that lie ahead of us.
Okay, I want to come back to what you mentioned about your time in the UAE. But before we get there, I think it's important to speak about Syria and Turkey, partly because to a large extent Syria's independence is to a very large extent thanks to Turkey's, or I wouldn't say just only them. Obviously, I think mainly the Syrian resilience and the Syrian resistance. But Turkey obviously played a very influential part in that, and it will change the dynamics of the region because now Turkey has additional strength, strategic depth through Syria. But first, before we even get to Turkey, do you think that Syria will stabilize? Israel seems to be threatening that to a large extent. There's other threats that we probably can't see. Just what's your thoughts on Syria?
So as you know, you followed me on Twitter for over a decade, and you know that I've been one of the most enthusiastic supporters of the Syrian uprising right from the start. I kind of made a reputation for myself being really going to war with many Palestinians for their. Unfortunately, there are many people in the pro-Palestine movement that have been supportive of Assad, and I found that absolutely disgusting and unacceptable. I would like to add, of course, that the majority of Palestinians, including the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, are very much on the side of the Syrian people and against Assad. That said, the events that happened, so I actually kind of predicted the fall of the Assad regime indirectly, because in 2016, I said that the Assad regime is unsustainable because it's completely dependent upon Iranian and Russian support. And if that support becomes shaky, Assad is not going to last. And in fact, after the liberation of Syria in December, I kind of like retweeted that to just say, there it is. And people are like, you said 2 weeks, it was just 1 week or something like that. Or you said a week and it was only 10 days. Syria needs very, very rapid nation building in order to stabilize. And I know that the task at hand is very tough. It's a very difficult task, and it requires a very skilled and very committed team. It requires a team, most of all, that is willing to put Syrian national interest above anything else, above their ideology, above their private worldview, above their sect, above their political project or affiliation. Syrian national project has to be above everybody. And this is going to be the main the main problem. Of course, Israel is going to be the main adversary, and I was kind of like I understood that when the events happened after December and you had this Israeli invasion of southern Syria, a lot of people are wondering, like, why didn't the new Syrian regime immediately initiate some action there? And I understand if you just liberated your country and you're still securing it, it's irresponsible for you to pick up a fight with a state which is aggressive and would like to wipe you out. It would like to wipe out a city just to make an example,
and it
make an
has
example.
massive American support.
Exactly. And so I understand why the new government would be careful when it comes to the way it's approaching Israel. That said, I feel like they have not. Maybe I'm wrong because I don't have a lot of contact with them, but I feel like they could have moved faster. The one thing I need Syrians to understand is that, again, like I said earlier in the interview, this is a different Israel. This is not the Israel of 1974 that Hafez al-Assad had to deal with. It is not the Syria of it's not the Israel of Olmert or Ehud Barak or even Shimon Peres. This is the Israel of Netanyahu and Ben Gvir and Smotrich. This is an Israel which is aggressive. It's already said what it wants. It wants Syria to be weak. This is exactly why they did not want Assad to fall in 2011, 2012. They very openly said, we want Syria to be weak because a strong Syria is a threat to them. They also want to maintain their ability for free military action within Syria. They want to be able to take out any emergent military power that they can see Syria building up. They want the ability to completely take it out. And again, the United States will let them. We, part of our work at Kawakibi Foundation is disinformation monitoring. It's a project that we inherited from Jamal Khashoggi. And we noticed disinformation activity right after the fall of Syria because, so like, I don't remember the exact date, but it was in December. And we could notice that they're starting to agitate, create fake accounts that claim to be Kurdish. This later extended to fake accounts that claim to be Alawite or Druze. And they have this thing where basically they would insult, they would actually like insult, they would have these accounts claim to be a certain ethnicity or a certain sect, and then insult certain people in order to get people to insult them back, to provoke a reaction and to basically say, you know what, they hate you. To take this to basically to Druze in general or to Kurds in general, so they say, look, they hate you. What's interesting is that 2 days later there was a feature, there was an op-ed in an Israeli newspaper which I had saved, and it openly said that Israel needs. It said something about how Israel needs its own proxy, just like Iran had the proxy. Basically, I don't believe that Hezbollah and Ansarullah and the Houthis are proxies in the strict sense. They're more allies than proxies, but basically, Israel is just like they had proxies. We have to have our own proxies, and they were talking about having some kind of like fostering some kind of militancy in the Kurdish region, in the Alawite region, and in the Druze region. This has now have become like kind of a strategy. Keep in mind that they're already selling tour packets, like tour guides and tours into the newly occupied Syrian territory. There's talk about settlements, and there's even talk about kind of like a southern Lebanon style administration for larger areas of Syria. Now, where does it leave the Syrian transitional government? First of all, the Syrian transitional government needs to, again, emphasize unity. It cannot screw up when it comes to relations with Syria's minorities. This is very important because there's 1,000 forces waiting to exploit this. If relations between the central government, between the transitional government and the Druze, the Alawites, the Kurds, the Assyrians, the Christians, etc., deteriorate, keep in mind Israel and other forces will be pushing for its deterioration. They will be pushing for civil war. They will be pushing for for militarization, for militancy, etc. So they need to be very careful in that. You mentioned Turkey, and Turkey right now is the only power in the region that can counter these Israeli plans. Because as you know, like Israel, Netanyahu actually gave I don't remember if it was a speech or a statement where basically described his plans for southern Syria. Basically, he wants to draw a line and say that the Syrian army is not allowed south of this line, and declare himself the protector of the Druze. So the quickest way for the Syrian government to counter this plan is to allow Turkish military bases in the south. Because Turkey is a powerful army, and with the Iranian regime and especially the Russian regime not in the area, it's going to complicate the situation a lot for Israel. My warning about that, of course, this is a quick way to solve a severe problem, but it could also backfire in two important ways. The first is that it could cause local resentment, because again, I don't think the Druze in the south, I don't know to what extent they're going to welcome a Turkish base nearby their villages. So this is something that needs to be approached with a lot of sensitivity. The second is that you don't want to outsource your security to Turkey. You want an independent Syria with an independent security policy. I've in the last 2 days, there's been kind of dramatic events when it comes to the PKK, when it comes to their leader Abdullah Öcalan, who he's in prison in Turkey, and he basically called upon the PKK to disarm and to disband. I don't know. We still don't know to what extent this will change the situation when it comes to the YPJ in Syria. I don't know to what extent they might comply or not. I don't know how it's going to change the Kurdish politics. I'm not an expert on that. But it seems to be a moment of opportunity for Turkey. It's a moment of expansion for Turkey. I also think it's a dangerous moment for Syria. Syria has to build its own power. It cannot piggyback or outsource its security to another power. It'll be very dangerous for it, like long term.
Do you think? I mean, in terms of democracy and freedoms, do you think that's going to be fine in the long term for Syria?
Um, I think we live in a democracy crisis worldwide. I think we need to kind of revisit what we mean even by democracy, because I remember in 2011 when we were talking about democracy during the early Arab Spring. It became very clear to me very early on. I think it was like April or May of 2011. The lazy Western reaction to the Arab Spring is that they're all going to adopt Western style democracy or Western style systems. But now, I mean, it's 13 years later. We know that Western style democracy itself is flawed. We know that Western style economics as a crisis factory, like it's creating inequality all over the world, creating crises, creating waves of populism, etc. So the Western model, like the Western model itself, is not attractive anymore. The problem here is that we haven't developed or evolved our own native model of democracy. And it's something we need to do. I think there was unfortunately, the attempts to do that, whether it's Tunisia or Egypt, etc., as flawed and as fraught with problems. There were attempts to actually have a Muslim Arab democracy or democratic practices, etc. That didn't continue. When I speak to people like average Syrians, I think an important thing, Ashfaq, to notice or to keep in mind is that when people say democracy, they don't want democracy. They want what democracy delivers them. They want prosperity. They want safety. They want political rights. They want to be able to express themselves. They want to be able to be safe in their own country. They want to feel like they matter. They want dignity. I feel like the deterioration of Western democracy, led by the United States, has really damaged the word democracy for a lot of people. Because a lot of people, when you say democracy, they think you want something what Americans have, or something like what the British have, etc. The British system is in crisis, but not as much as the American system. Which is why people default to say that we want a competent government that delivers these values, that delivers these things. I believe that it's been said before that democracy is the worst kind of government, the worst style of government, except for all the others, because democracy in the end is a way to stop the governance system from becoming dictatorial to becoming tyrannical. I mean, we named our foundation, Kawakibi Foundation, after Abdurrahman al-Kawakibi because he wrote a lot about this stuff in late 19th century, early 20th century. So I think it's. I mean, you asked the question was like, do you think it's going to be democratic or not?
I mean, it's connected to prosperity. Do you think it's going to be prosperous and free, and do you think we're going to have a stable, thriving society?
To be completely honest with you, I think that Syria right now is living in an interregnum. It's living in a period of peace between two wars, because I think that war with Israel is inevitable. This is not an Israel that's going to let you build your country safely. This is an Israel that's going to make sure that you can't get up on your feet. And I think it's very depressing. It's very depressing, and I almost feel like crying saying it, because Syria has seen enough. Syria has seen enough, death, enough destruction, enough war. But this is my analysis. I just can't bite my tongue. I feel like Israel is already in a state of war with Syria. It's already bombing things in Syria, but it can escalate massively at any point. And I think it will do this government well to plan accordingly, to say that yes, at any point there can be a war with Israel. Israel is not going to let us rebuild. Israel is our enemy. It has already considered us to be an enemy, and there's no path to peace with Israel. I think this is an important point that people really, overlook. Israel is never going to give back the Golan Heights. It was never going to, and it never will, and it can't. Israel's entire water supply actually comes from the Golan Heights. So like this, like it's like from a security point of view, you just can't give it back. And so there's no land for peace. On what basis is there going to be peace with Israel? There can't be. So I think that the focus in Syria should be on very quick nation building, and on building a strong industrial and economic base. It's a very, very, very tough task. I hope the people in charge are like, they understand just how tough and how important the task is, and how they have to take it very solemnly, and they have to put Syrian national interest above everything else.
Okay, I think this is going to be it's not going to be my final question, but probably penultimate question. You mentioned earlier on that you grew up in the UAE. You were asked to leave a few years back. Do you want to just run us through what happened there? Why were you asked to leave, and where have you been since?
So yeah, I grew up. I said I was born in Kuwait, but really I don't remember Kuwait because I was like a week old. My family lived in the United Arab Emirates even before I was born, and I was born in Kuwait. My mom traveled to give birth to me, and then I was back in the UAE. And I lived only in the UAE. I lived in no other country until 2014, when I was 37 years old. So the country, basically, I grew up with the country. I mean, I was born in 1977. The country itself was like 6 years old. So it was my only frame of reference was the United Arab Emirates. It was the only country I called home. We felt, people who were living in the country felt a sense of solidarity, but we felt that things changed when Sheikh Zayed died in 2004. We felt that something shifted, like something shifted in the governance, in the energy of the country. Sheikh Zayed was not a Democrat. He was, he had his own flaws, but I believed he was a good man. So in 2011, when the Arab Spring started, I was in this moment where I was starting to understand that, I'm in my early 30s. I started to understand that, yes, I feel that this is my country, but it doesn't treat me that way. I'm still stateless. I'm still a Palestinian refugee. I still have to be I still have to follow the same residency rules as everybody else. There's no guarantee for me that it's kind of like an unrequited love, where you love this country but it doesn't really love you back. So there was questions of belonging, questions of where do I really belong. But in 2011 I became an activist. I decided to join the Arab Spring uprisings. Of course I couldn't join any protests, but my own Arab Spring experience was basically going online and making my presence. And I, from the beginning, I tweeted with my real name, with my real face. I never tried to hide who I am. I felt that if my brethren, my sisters and brothers across the Arab region, are risking their lives, facing riot police, then who am I to try to play it safe, and who am I to use a pseudonym? I felt like I have a moral responsibility to put myself under as much danger as they are putting themselves. And to me, that meant being very public about everything, being an open book. Fortunately or unfortunately, I became very popular on Twitter very quickly. There was there's a certain size of an account where you're kind of 50,000 followers. You're not yet in the 100,000 category, but you're not small anymore. So you can't be. You're in a danger zone where you're not too big. You're not so small as to be ignored, but you're not so big as to be protected. Unfortunately, that's when the counter-revolution hit. The United Arab Emirates, as you know, was one of the main forces for the counter-revolution. They were very adamant against democracy. They continue to be. They don't want democracy for the region. They don't want the region to. They were very inconvenienced by, or really disadvantaged by, the change in the regional order, because they felt that there was a regional order that they understood, and that privileged them. And of course, you could see their activities since then in the region and internationally. So I was given a couple warnings, not to go into details, but eventually I was arrested. The arrest itself came at a very traumatic time, because the day before I was arrested, my very close friend Bassem Sabri from Egypt was, he fell from a balcony to his death in Egypt. The next morning, I was arrested, and I still wonder if there was a connection between the two events, because me and him were doing a lot of things together. We were starting a lot of initiatives together, and we kind of led kind of a secret Facebook group of activists, like activist to activist support. So we founded it together. So being stateless, I ended up. So I was in prison for a while because there's nowhere to send me. I'm stateless, so they can't send me back to. Like they said, you have to go back to your country, but there's no country to send me back to. In prison, I was mostly with. There was a jail cell that included Arabs. It was mostly Syrians and Palestinians at the time. So there is this sense of identification with the Syrian struggle right from the start, because later on, when after I got out of prison, I managed to select, let's say, not really a selection. It was really the only choice, but basically, instead of being sent back to Egypt, because I had Egyptian travel document as a refugee at the time, I convinced the prison authorities to send me to Malaysia. In Malaysia, I could not enter the country because I was stateless, so I lived in the airport for about a month. But eventually managed to make it into Malaysia and managed to get invited into a human rights conference in Norway in October of 2014. And I've lived in Norway since then. I applied for asylum, lived in refugee camp. Again, it was lots of Syrians. And in 2023, I was granted Norwegian citizenship finally. So that's the story with the UAE. Of course, for many years after leaving the UAE, I still missed the country tremendously and missed my community and missed my family and friends. And I still felt a certain affinity to the country. But I feel like after 2020 and the Abrahamic Accords and the reaction or lack of reaction from a lot of people in the UAE to this, I felt that I lost my last bit of Emirati identity. I am Palestinian and only Palestinian. Of course, I am Norwegian too, and I'm extremely grateful for this country. And I feel, in many ways, I feel Norwegian. I feel a sense of Norwegian identity and affinity. But Palestine has been and will always be the first cause. But again, like I said when I started when we started the conversation, Palestine will not be liberated in isolation. So to be Palestinian means to believe in the Arab Spring. It means to believe in Arab identity. It also means to believe in Islamic identity, and it means to believe in collective liberation for everyone in the world.
Final. I mean, it's the final question, but it's gonna be two-parted. I mean, do you live in fear at all? Do you think there's spies or people from the Emirates or maybe from Saudi or from any other regime that may be looking for you, following you? And then the second and the last question really is just, what are you working on, and what are your hopes for the future?
So I skipped this part, but I've been in danger several times. It's not only the imprisonment, and during my imprisonment there was a threat of being sent back to Egypt, where I would have been disappeared. But then in 2017, I received a threat from ISIS. They put my name on a hit list, like a list of for lone wolves to attack, etc. This is because I was working with anti-ISIS activists, Syrian anti-ISIS activists. But then the main threat to my life really came in the aftermath of the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi. Jamal Khashoggi was a friend. It wasn't a very long friendship. It was really after he chose exile after 2017. We started speaking, and I hosted him in Norway in 2018, and started working together on certain projects. But then after his assassination, I was outraged. And I decided that I'm going to do whatever I can to expose and to bring justice. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do that, but I think we were able to damage the reputation of the Crown Prince and his project enough. That said, in the aftermath of that, I was informed by the Norwegian secret police, the Norwegian PST, that I'm a target of assassination. They were informed this by the CIA. So the CIA actually informed the Norwegian intelligence that this person is a target and he needs to be under protection. So these years, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, I did live in fear. At some point, it felt like a terminal illness. It felt like, I don't know when they're going to do it. I don't know how they're going to do it. I don't know if it's going to be them or it's going to be someone else. I don't know if it's going to be ISIS. I don't know if it's going to be Saudi Arabia or it's going to be the Israelis. But I felt like, my time is limited and I had to adjust to that. It's difficult. It's a difficult place to be, especially if, you're a father, you're trying your best to build something, etc. I have to say that in 2023, when I became a Norwegian citizen, so of course I had an ongoing relationship with the Norwegian intelligence because I used to have yearly meetings with them just to kind of get updated on my security. In 2023, when I became a Norwegian citizen, I kind of breathed kind of I felt some relief. I felt that now I'm a citizen of a country which is a member of NATO, which is an important country, etc. And I felt that I'm more protected. That said, it's quite possible that they could be hacking my phone. They could be looking into my communications, etc. The thing about what I learned about a lot of these regimes is that they're crisis oriented. What I mean by crisis oriented is that they seem to be working on a few of them actually think about those glacial trends that we speak about. They don't really think about that. They're thinking about how do we solve the current problem. They're kind of going from crisis to crisis. How do we solve this crisis so that we can get out of the next crisis, etc. Very few of these regimes, some of them actually do like long-term planning, but most of them don't. And it's kind of an afterthought. A lot of the work that I'm doing is about really working on these glacial, long-term, slow-moving projects. I feel like we activists, I hope that in this interview I kind of demonstrated that I am skilled at geopolitical thinking, but that doesn't take away my first title of activist. I think activists need to be skilled at this kind of big picture thinking because we have to think about what's possible. We have to be strategic and we have to be strategists in the way that we do our work. So for this reason, I feel like they might not see a lot of what I'm working on to be a direct threat, because they're more likely to be focused on today's crises, and in many cases, the kind of work that we do at Kawakibi we're kind of getting ahead of the crises of 5 years later, 6 years later, 3 years later, etc. That said, it's quite possible. I think the explosion of spyware technology right now is that it's almost trivial for them to get into a phone. The question is, what kind of information do they want, and how useful is it going to be to them? So about what I'm working on. So at Kawakibi, you gave a good introduction to Kawakibi. That's the introduction to from the website. But really, what Kawakibi is an interdisciplinary team of activists, artists, technologists, thought leaders, knowledge producers, etc. Who normally don't come together. So 2011 was kind of the genesis of our project because I'm also working with some activists who also became active in 2011, like Rami Assam from Egypt, for example, Khalid al-Bey from Sudan, Ahmed Gatmash from Libya, for example. But what's important to our work really is this long-term view. So we do work on disinformation, we do work on geopolitical analysis for activists, and we do work on knowledge production. The project that I'm specifically working on within the team is the launch of a research center. We're hoping to do this, by the middle of the year, maybe before the middle of the year. A research center which is focused on knowledge production for our movement and for our region. Knowledge is power, and I think it's important for power to own your own knowledge production.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you, Iyad el-Baghdadi, for joining me. Thank you for your time. It's been an enlightening and informative discussion. And I hope to be seeing you around and speaking to you again, potentially on the podcast and also in person.
Thank you, Ashfaq.
Thank you. Salam.